I'm Associate Professor of Media Law at the Reynolds School. My name is Patrick File. And I get to welcome you and introduce our illustrious guests and set the stage for our discussion. First, I want to extend a heartfelt thanks to Warren and Janet Lerude. Warren is Professor Emeritus at the Reynolds School, a longtime media law professor, and he and Janet are committed to ensuring the First Amendment remains a core value at the University of Nevada. Their generous support helps make this event possible. So please join me in thanking them. I'd also like to thank KUNR for their promotional support of this event, and of course, I'd like to thank the wonderful staff at the Reynolds School and here at the Joe Crowley Student Union for always making sure everything runs so smoothly with this event. Free expression on campus. Thanks to what we've seen play out at colleges and universities across the country in recent years, it's a phrase that should evoke a simple nod of acknowledgement or even a smile of pride among students, administrators, educators, but instead might be more likely to send a tingle down your spine for telling tales of obnoxious speeches, disruptive dissent, and regrettable censorship. Maybe the problem is people who are co-opting the First Amendment to force extreme and harmful ideologies down the throats of unwilling audiences. Maybe it's the students and faculty who are overly sensitive and can't cope with ideas that are counter to their own. Or maybe, just maybe, it's a bit more nuanced than all that. My own search for that nuance led me to the work of our guest tonight. Ike Bailey is an award-winning journalist and writer on a range of topics for publications including CNN, McClatchy newspapers, and the Nieman Foundation for Journalism at Harvard. He's a Laventhal Visiting Professor at Columbia Journalism School in New York and James K. Batten Professor of Public Policy at Davidson College in North Carolina. Through his recent work at Davidson, leading an effort to develop and adopt a new freedom of expression statement for the school, Ike has done some hard thinking and thoughtful writing about what's really going on with freedom of expression on campus. I happen to think he's contributed intellectual honesty and integrity to a conversation that too often lacks an appreciation for complexity and nuance. Too much heat, not enough light, so to speak. So that's what I asked him to come and talk about tonight, to share some of what he's learned and to help us think about what we think freedom of expression is for at an institution like ours. Ike will have the floor for about 25 minutes, then I will ask a few questions of him, and then, as always, we'll dedicate 30 minutes or more of this forum to your questions. So now please help me welcome Ike J. Bailey.
This is the word of the night. This is the foundation of every single thing that I am going to say tonight, and also sort of like ask you to do, which starts now. So the first thing I want you to do is stand up. And it's like, I want you to like actually find a partner and do this. Face up to the partner and do this.
Just hold right.
Yeah, for right now. Remember, the watchword is trust. You gotta trust me right now, right? In the eyes, with your partner, face to face, just like this. I'm like, yes, like, and because like in terms of sort of that, like this is actually the psychic stance like which we all default to on these issues, especially among strangers, and especially on the really difficult, emotional, complex topics. This is what we do instantly. Like the first thing we do is to like actually put these up, like in order to attack or to defend. And we do this, by the way, automatically. It's scary, so therefore, I need to get in my stance and get ready. And yet, though, like in terms of sort of that, like what I want you to do tonight is put these down. Put these down. And I'm at least like, at least to like actually trust the folks around you enough, and also me, yes, like in order to be able to listen and also sort of like, just like, and also how I'm at least to like actually be uncomfortable sometimes. Yes, like, and also to challenge each other and even me. Okay, thank you very much for saying that. I actually failed this test spectacularly, right? Yes, like it was back in 1994 at Davidson College. And I was a junior or a senior by then, 1994, 1995. It was a long time ago, you know, my head gets messed up there. But it was back then, right? And then so, well, yes, and then so, in terms of that, like I sort of like had like actually sort of like actually made a name for myself, like actually writing for the student newspaper. Yes, like I had gotten pretty, you know, sort of like popular, yes, like, and also, you know, backlash, et cetera, like all those sort of things. And so like what started to happen, yes, in terms of that, like, is that I started to get invited to panel discussions, I'm like, and make speeches, et cetera, right? And so one night, in fact, in terms of that, like I was like actually doing this discussion. Yes, I was up on stage. Yes, I was giving my presentation. I was doing all of my stuff, et cetera. I did it. Yes, I got the hand clap. Yay, yay, yay. And then the sort of like questions sort of like actually came in from the audience, right? And a guy named Brian put his hand in the air and he asked a question. And he said, yes, and then so, yes, and so, and I'm like, why exactly do you talk like that? Right. And so like for me, in terms of that, like I sort of like actually still sort of like, yes, like in terms of sort of like actually still sort of like stutter, right? I'm like, and yet though sort of like that night, it was really bad. I mean, like really, 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 really bad. Yes, like in fact, like in terms of that, like it was difficult. That's like in order for me to like actually put, in order for me to like actually say a sentence. Yes, like or sort of like two words back to back. And yet I was on that stage talking for about 30 minutes, 35 minutes, and everybody in that audience was squirming. Yes, like in terms of that, like I could see it on their faces, body movements, et cetera, like all of that, yeah, sitting really, really quietly and really, really squirming. And I am certain that everybody in that audience, like in terms of sort of like actually wanted to ask me the question that Brian did, but only he did. And yet, though, sort of like actually for his bravery, I chewed him out. I mean, I tore into him like I did not tear into anybody else before or since. How dare you say something like that to me? How dare you question my presence on this stage simply because I have a disability? How dare you disrespect me like that? How dare you offend me like that? And I went on like that for about 5 straight minutes with him. And also like in terms of sort of like actually during those 5 minutes, like as in terms of sort of that, like my speech was like clear, to be perfectly frank, because I was so angry and it was just flowing. It was like this rhythm it was like, how dare you disrespect me like this? Here it is, I am up on this stage, being brave in front of everybody with my disability. And here it is that you are offended by me. That's what I did to Brian. And yet, all Brian did was ask a question that everybody else in the audience also wanted to ask. And by the way, like in terms of that, like it actually was a reasonable question. And yet though, like in terms of like actually during that period, I actually did not trust myself enough, just like in order to hear the question. I did not trust my strength enough, just like in order to listen for the intent of the question. I actually did not trust my self-worth enough in order to answer his question instead of attacking him. And why was that? Here is why. That is because, like in terms of that, like I was also really doubtful, at least about my own worth. Because in terms of that, like I could like actually have all of these pretty words in the newspaper. Yes, like actually get people to really think, etc. Yes, like I can stand up on stages and speak and stutter and all this kind of stuff. And I get all of this praise from folks. Oh my God, you are so brave. Oh my God, you are so wonderful. Oh my God, you are my hero. And yet, despite all of that, in here was nothing but doubt. I did not trust myself enough in order to be able to engage with Ryan, at least like on a very serious and sensible question. Trust. That night, I failed that test. Not Brian. I failed that test that night. And yet, though, think about it. In every single relationship that we have, yes, like, at least like actually when you cut to the chase, the glue is this. This is the glue. Do I trust you? Like, do you trust me? But even more importantly, and this is the part that a lot of people leave out, do I trust myself enough to engage on really serious, really emotional, really complex issues across difference? Am I strong enough to do it? Do I believe in my voice enough to do it? Do I trust my ability to listen enough to do it? And yet, oftentimes, this is the piece of it that we either ignore or forget. And oftentimes, like in terms of sort of that, like we sort of project our internal distrust that's like onto others. I don't trust myself. And so like, therefore, at least like in order to get around that uncomfortable reality, yes, like in terms of that, like I can just say that like it is your fault, at least for not making me comfortable enough first. in order to be able to hear you, in order for me to be able to listen to you. And yet though, like in terms of sort of that, like that is on a micro scale. Yeah, it's like individual scale. And yet for us, like in terms of sort of that, like there is a bigger question about trust as well. At least like actually when it comes to an institution like a college or a university. And so sort of like recently, as in terms of sort of like Stanford Law, sort of like actually made sort of like headlines as in terms of like, as in terms of sort of at least like over this video. Just like what we're gonna watch it right quick.
I am not, in the business of wanting to either shut down speech, because I do know that if they come for this group today, they will come for the group that I am part of tomorrow. I do believe that, and I understand why people feel like the harm is so great that we might need to reconsider those policies. And luckily, they're in a school where they can learn the advocacy skills to advocate for those changes. I hope that you have something to share with us that we can learn from. I hope you can learn too while you're in this learning institution. I hope you can look to the spectacle of it and the noise to the people holding these signs. The people who are here to learn. The people who, just like you, absolutely are fighting for, working for freedom. Just to be free, to be themselves. That is what they are here for. They are here because they feel harmed, not just by your speech. If it was just words, that would be one thing. You have authority and you have power to make decisions that impact the lives of millions. And I hope if you learn anything, that you can listen through your partisan lens, the hyper-political lens, and just look and see human beings who are asking you to take care. And like all guests on our campus, we ask that you come with good intentions and respect. And I do want to hear your remarks, and I do want to say thank you for protecting the free speech that we value here of our speakers and of our protesters. And I want to remind you all of one thing. I chose to be here today. You all chose to be here today. Many people go before Judge Duncan who do not necessarily choose to be there. And they have to listen to everything he says. Literally thousands of people. You have a choice. You do not need to stay here if this is not where you want to be. You can stay here if this is where you want to be right now. But make that choice. If you do choose to stay here, I do think we should give space to hear what Judge Duncan has to say. And I hope that also you will take question and answer and comment section to say what you need to say and to ask the questions you need to ask. I'm really grateful to be in this institution. I look out and I don't ask what is going on here. I look out and I say, I'm glad this is going on here.
The odd thing about that is that actually is an example of a healthy free speech environment. Yes, let me say that again. That actually is an example of a healthy free speech environment. And yet, Stanford actually did not trust itself enough, that's like in order to acknowledge that fact. What you saw on that video was free expression in action. There were protesters, angry, calling names, etc. Yes, and also like terms sort of that, like there actually was a judge in terms sort of there to speak, and also in terms sort of that, like there actually was a DEI administrator, her. Just like in terms sort of like, just like in terms sort of that, like who actually did two things in that video. The first thing she did was to like actually speak honestly, at least about her own thoughts, and also to sort of like actually acknowledged like these sort of like thoughts and feelings of the protesters. First, she did that. And then after that, she upheld Stanford's commitment to free expression by saying, after that, just in terms of sort of that, he is welcome here to speak. And so therefore, in terms of that, I am going to make sure that he has a space to speak here. And not only that, in terms of that, I am going to model listening across difference. Listening to him, even though I don't share his views. All of that happened right there. All of that happened right there. Which meant that Stanford Law had actually created a healthy free speech environment, which, by the way, is sometimes loud, is sometimes messy, is sometimes scary, is sometimes confusing, is sometimes angry. Yes, all of those things are part of a healthy free speech environment. It isn't just about you and I sitting across from each other, just having a coffee, legs crossed, and dialoguing nicely back and forth. That too is a part of a free speech environment, healthy free speech environment. But it isn't the only definition of a healthy free speech environment. Sometimes tensions are going to rise and bubble over, even when the environment is healthy. Think about this for a second. On August 1st this year, I actually will be celebrating my 25th wedding anniversary, right? To Tracy, thank you very much. To Tracy Swinton Bailey. Yeah. Yes, and also in terms of sort of that, yes, in terms of sort of that, I sort of actually know her better than anybody else in the world, and she, me. Yes, and also in terms of that, we actually trust each other more than anybody else. We love each other more than anybody else. We pull for each other more than anybody else. And yet, guess what has happened over the past 25 years? Any guesses? That sometimes we have had disagreements. Sometimes unpleasant disagreements. Even in the midst of an extremely healthy, long-standing relationship. Just in which we know each other through and through and through. I love her to death. And I also think that she likes me too, right? Even in that scenario, we have had disagreements. Sometimes we have been like this, not even realizing that this is what we have been doing. Again, in a healthy environment like that, we still have this sometimes. It still happens. Think about you and your best friend, or you and your mom and your dad, or whoever it is that you can think about right now, right? Even in your healthiest relationships, you still have clashes. You still have confusions, and sometimes anger, and sometimes fear. It does not mean that your relationship is not healthy. It just simply means that you are human. Just like every single institution built by humans will also have those same types of imperfections. Stanford, in that case, had actually created an environment, just in order to actually have that happen and not have the whole thing collapse. And yet, instead of celebrating that, they apologized for it. Oh my God, I can't believe those students did that. Oh my God, I can't believe that DEI director spoke her own thoughts. oh my God, that is so unfair. It's like actually to this really powerful judge. Oh my God, we look so bad. Oh my God. It makes no sense. And yet though, what often happens is because of this unnecessary pitting of diversity and inclusion and free expression. That's what happened at Stanford. At least like sort of like in like the aftermath to that. Like they actually gave into that narrative. Oh my God, that these two things clash instead of complement. But here is the cold, hard truth. Diversity and inclusion and free expression, they need each other. Diversity and inclusion and free expression, they need each other. Because like if you so-called have free expression, and yet though like in terms of sort of that, like what you have like actually done in advance, it's like in terms of like is to like either intentionally or unintentionally excluded certain voices, then guess what? That's not really free expression. That's phony. That's phony. It is also true on the other end. If your goal really is diversity, inclusion, equality, then guess what that means? You have to embrace free expression. There is no getting around that, which means that yes, that there are like sometimes like in which there are going to be people who are going to piss you off. Yes, like who are going to offend you. Yes, like who are going to call you dirty, nasty names. Yes, yes, yes. But one without the other simply doesn't work. One without the other is phony. It is fake. One without the other is not a true principle. And so lastly, right quick, like in terms of sort of that, like what I want to like actually like emphasize to folks, again, it's like actually going back to this word here. It's like actually at the macro level, the institutional level, that principle sort of, in terms sort of like absolutely needs to be clear. We are a free speech, free expression, academic freedom institution, period, bottom line, case closed. Period, bottom line, case closed. That absolutely needs to be shouted from the hills 1,000 times. And also shouting from the hills that we are also inclusive and diverse, not for the sake of diversity itself. I am not in favor of diversity for diversity's sake. I'm not. Yes, like, and also like terms of that, like I am not for free expression for its own sake. At an institution, that's a term sort of that, like I sort of embrace those things. Yes, like, and because like in terms of sort of that, like I know that that combination, as in terms of sort of like, I'm like, is our best route to academic excellence. That's why, not for its own sake. But those two things combined, complementing each other. Iron sharpening iron. I test you, you test me. We get better together. Not for its own sake, but for that ultimate principle. Even when it gets hard as hell, even when it is uncomfortable as hell, even when it scares us to no end, even when we are offended, feel overlooked, we must embrace both of those principles. But the big stumbling block on that journey is trust. Do you trust the institution to uphold those principles in the toughest moments, at the macro level and at the micro level? Do you trust yourself enough, that's like in order to be able to embrace those principles when things don't really feel good? Thank you for that.
Thank you so much for that, Ike. And I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about the statement that you worked with, and as I understand it was a group of students and faculty and administrators sort of across the board on freedom of expression at Davidson College. And this was, I mean, this kind of was finally, I don't know, enacted or put into place, or however it's however it was kind of made official relatively recently, right? Like within the last couple of months.
Yes.
So I think maybe the best way or the best question to ask to kind of give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about that process is, what was the hardest part of developing that statement?
Toughest part about that process, was at the very beginning. Yes, in terms of actually knew that I was actually dealing with these issues. Yes, in the classroom and also in journalism, et cetera. And then so she actually tapped me and said, hey, come lead this. And then I said yes at first. Said, sure, okay, that's cool. Yes, president, yes, it's like asking you to do something, so you, you try to go do it. So it makes sense, right? And yet though, and then shortly after that though, in terms of that, she actually told me about, one person, which she wanted to make sure was included. And so the process was just in order for me to actually, actually pick a colleague and two students, just in order to actually join a group. And I did that, and also, in terms of that, those folks actually, they actually have a lot of differences when it comes to politics, ideology, et cetera. Yeah, so we had that. Yes, and also, yes, a sort of trustee member, yes, was also chosen. And yet this other member, in terms of actually caused me to reconsider. Yes, and also because in terms of that, he actually is a former governor of North Carolina and a graduate of Davidson College and a former teacher at Davidson. Yes, and so of course he is a natural kind of person, yes, in order to be, yes, part of this group, right? And yet though, in terms of that, he was also, yes, a member, yes, in terms of this alumni group. And the best way for me to say it, which is a group that I have vehement, passionate, disgusting disagreements with. A whole lot. And then so here, it's here it was in terms of that, she was asking me to actually ask him to be on the group as well. And I actually told her, I said, listen, that I'm not sure that, I'm not sure that this can work. Because I think that he is just too far, afield from me, et cetera. And then she's actually just looked at me real gently and said, well, he's I should just give it a try. Yeah, it's just like that. And then I said, well, okay. Yeah. And also in terms of that, the only reason why that I said okay that at that moment is because I trusted her. Seriously, honestly. The only reason I said yes at that moment was because I trusted her. Period, bottom line. I said yes to that, et cetera. And then so like this is what happened. Folks were like actually really doubting, just like in terms of sort of that our ability, just like in order to like actually pull a statement together. And also because sort of like in North Carolina right now, there's a lot of issues, to say the least. Yes, a lot of issues. Yes, pulling this way, pulling that way, et cetera. Lots of stuff. And so essentially, just in terms of sort of that, like nobody just like actually really thought that we could do it because of that. And yet, it actually was one of the easiest processes that I had actually gone through. And so like, here's why. It actually was because like every member of the group, like in terms of sort of like actually was committed to free expression as a principle. Yes, like every member of our committee, yes, in terms of sort of like actually was like thoroughly committed. Yes, like, and also sort of like Governor Martin included. And so like actually during our deliberations, like in terms of sort of that, like we actually did not talk about politics much at all, or ideology, or those kind of things whatsoever. Just in terms of sort of that, like our sole focus was just like was to like actually craft a statement, just like which could sort of like actually serve just like as a guidepost for us. Yes, like, and also to like at least to like actually get support like across difference. And we did that. Yeah.
What was the most surprising thing? You might have kind of touched on this, saying that you were a little surprised at how easy it was. I mean, easy, but
well, yeah, yes. Yes, like terms of that, like I was like actually really surprised at sort of like Governor Martin. Yes, like he was like actually this. He actually spoke his piece for sure. But yes, like he was very like clear, just like about like what he wanted, et cetera. And yet though, like in terms of sort of that, like he was like also sort of like ready, just like in order to like actually go along, just like actually with the consensus, in terms of sort of that, like even if he did not agree with it. And so like that was that really, really surprising to me. Yes, like, and also sort of, at least like actually during that process, just like in terms of that, like we were like actually thinking about like actually having like this free expression week, it's like at Davidson. And so, yes, and then so, yes, in terms of sort of that, like we sort of like actually kicked around the idea, yes, like of sort of like actually having my nieces sort of like actually come, yes, like in order to like actually speak at campus, at least about like their sort of like difficulties, at least like actually when it comes to free expression, fear, et cetera, like all that kind of stuff. Yes, like, well, yes, like, and also like in terms of sort of that, well, yes, like, and also like in terms of sort of that, like those sort of like nieces, yes, like are sort of like Hallie and sort of, well, yes, like, and also sort of, yes, like in terms of sort of, yes, like in terms of sort of, like Chloe Bailey. Yes, in terms of, sort of like actually next month, like in terms of sort of like Hallie is like actually starring, yes, like in like the Little Mermaid movie. Yeah, so like that's her and that's them, et cetera, right? Well, yes, like, and also like in terms of sort of that, like especially for like those two, like in terms of sort of that, like they sort of like actually have had to like actually navigate, as in terms of like all of these kinds of pressures, like at least about like free expression or sort of like actually going along with certain things, et cetera. Yes, like, and also like in terms of sort of that, yes, I think it was like actually for like the 2019 Super Bowl, for instance. Yes, in terms of sort of that, like they sort of like actually were sort of like invited to sing. And yet though, like in terms of sort of that, yes, like in terms of sort of that, like they are sort of like actually was like this boycott, like at least by sort of like several Black people, yes, like in order to support sort of Kaepernick protest and kneeling, et cetera, that kind of stuff. And so like essentially like in terms of sort of that, like they sort of like, like were sort of like actually, like they were like actually pressured, yes, like in order to not participate, et cetera. Yes, a lot of pressure. I mean, like a lot of, yes. Like, and yet though, like in terms of sort of that, yes, like, so like essentially like in terms of sort of that, like if we could get them there, just like in order to like actually speak to the students about like those types of pressures, et cetera, like and how to deal with those issues, yes, it would have been great. And yet though, like in terms of sort of that, like there actually were like some resistance to them, in large part because of sort of like actually talking about free expression and the First Amendment, and yet though, like in terms of sort of that, like these were just two young Black women, right? Yes, it was crazy like that, right? And yet though, Governor Martin, well, yes, like in terms of sort of like actually was sort of like one of the first persons, like in order to like actually, at least to like actually sort of embrace the idea, just like in order to like actually bring them in. And so like what I had to sort of like also sort of like reassess about myself, just like, yes, like in terms of sort of that, but yes, like in terms of sort of that, I'm like whether or not like I sort of actually had been sort of actually true to my own preaching, at least like actually when it came to Governor Martin, for instance. Yes, like, and because sort of like, at least sort of like in all of my classes, like in terms of sort of that, like I sort of like always like actually, just like I always tell my students to check their biases, their knee jerks, like all of that. Every single class I teach, everywhere I teach. Yeah, I really, 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 really hammer that home. And yet in that instance, like I sort of like actually, yes, like in terms of that, like I sort of like actually had failed again. And yet though, yes, in terms of sort of that, like my sort of like trust in our president, sort of like actually, at least like sort of like actually helped me get over that.
Your nieces are Chloe and
like Halle Bailey.
Hannah. So it sounds like what you're saying is I should have promoted this event as Hannah and Chloe's uncle is going to come talk.
Right.
And that would have maybe filled the seats.
Well, maybe,
okay.
yeah.
So my last question, sort of along the same lines, is, you know, when you come up with a statement on freedom of expression, it's a set of rules or a set of guidelines, but it's also, you're trying to say something with it. And so what is the most important thing that you think this statement says?
One, at least it will actually be extremely clear that as an institution, as in terms of sort of that, like this principle is absolutely paramount, period, bottom line, right? Yes, like, and also like in terms of sort of that, like what we also try to do is to be very honest, like at least about sort of like how our institution just like actually had for too long, yes, like in terms of like, as in terms of sort of like, as in terms of sort of that, my hands are actually falling short of this. Because like, for instance, like in terms of sort of that, like Davidson was founded in 1837. And for the first century and 30 years or so. Yes, in terms of that, like it was white and male. That's it. Like everybody else was excluded, right? And yet, though, like in terms of sort of that, like in our founding documents, like in terms of sort of that, like we actually talked about free expression as a principle. Free expression as a principle. And yet, though, again, that actually was phony rhetoric at that point. Because like what we had done, yes, like actually was to exclude all of these folks, all of these voices. We had silenced all these voices first. We push you to the side. Let me ignore you. You are unworthy. And then say, let's embrace freedom of expression. Right? That's fake. That is phony. That is not real. And then so sort of, at least like sort of like actually what we had to do in this statement, yes, like, yes, like in terms of sort of like actually was to like actually be able to like tell folks, listen, that back then was fake and wrong and caused harm. Yes, like, yes, like in order to like actually try to be honest with folks, like in order to get them to trust us, right? And then so like actually from there, yes, and then so like our sort of like goal, as in terms of like actually was to like actually make this just like a sort of aspiration. Well, yes, like and also sort of like actually just last month, the faculty affirmed it, and the Board of Trustees did as well. And yet, though, like in terms of sort of that, like actually when I go back to Davidson in the fall.